Hi, this is John Spencer, and this is the first vlog or podcast, video blog on the subject of International Parental Child Abduction, child brainwashing, and parental alienation, which is a subject hardly anybody in the world knows of, except people like myself and many other parents in the world who have had their children alienated by the other parent, and left behind parents of children who are victims of International Parental Child Abduction, of which my son Angelo is also one. My son was abducted by his mother without my knowledge or consent in 2014 from our home in Thailand to Singapore. And he has been and is still being parentally alienated and being taught to remember bad things about his father, most of which are invented, so false memories or manipulated memories, some of which may be true because none of us are perfect, and every parent makes mistakes in their life, every father and every mother, as part of being a parent. Like maybe shouting too loudly or those kind of things. But in the last 3 years, my son has been so brainwashed and alienated that when he's asked if he wants to talk to or see his dad, he says no. Well, actually, when I ask him alone, he says yes, and he remembers Thailand and he does want to come. And when I ask him during his daily FaceTime calls, which, as I am the lawful joint custodian but not the primary caregiver, he lives with his mum in Singapore, and I have a daily FaceTime call because I live in Thailand for half an hour, and supposed to be unsupervised, meaning the mother should not interfere, but she refuses to let him close the door, and she interferes and switches us off or mutes the conversation and tells him what to say if I touch on any subjects that might refer to him visiting in Thailand. And so this is for all you left behind parents of internationally or nationally parentally abducted children, and parents of children whose other parent are brainwashing them to hate you. This one's for you. And this is also to increase awareness of this terrible human rights abuse on children which is being made by parents, knowingly or unknowingly. Many parents don't even realize that they're alienating. They're just acting in hate and anger and revenge and vengefulness. And when couples break up and they start to argue and fight, sometimes they forget their children and the damage they're doing to their children. This is supposed to be an introductory video because I'm going to post a series of recorded talks which are in episodes, which I would like interested subscribers to follow and to slowly listen to one by one and read the comments I add to each video I upload in this playlist, which I haven't decided on the name of the playlist yet, but it's probably going to be Stop Parental Child Abduction, Alienation and Child Brainwashing. That's a bit of a long title. I have to think of a shorter title for the playlist. So I just went to visit my son for Christmas from the 19th to the 24th of December, and we had a great time. So I think in my next video I'll post some slideshow of showing what a great time we had. And then there are going to be 3, 4 or 5, 3 recordings and then 2 videos coming in sequence after this video, which the first 3 are sound recordings of a conversation between me and the mother about how I always try during my visits to make sure my son messages his mum to update her and keep in touch, but how in the last 3 years she has never taught him to answer the many messages I send my son every day on his iPhone, and that she makes no effort to teach him to build a relationship and love his father and talk to his father. Rather, the opposite. She actually lets him neglect that, and she is also manipulating him and brainwashing him directly. The 23.5 hours a day, I don't know what she's talking to him about. I see the result when I talk to him. So if you please watch and listen to the next 4 or 5 video and podcasts which follow this in this playlist, then you will slowly but surely understand how the other parent is not only abducting through retention, but is parentally alienating and brainwashing my child. I'm currently in contact with mikk-ev.de. It's a German mediation, international, United Nations affiliated custody and parental children's rights and parental child abduction mediation agency who are trying to mediate with Singapore. When my son was abducted, I tried to use the Hague Parental Child Abduction Act to get him back because he was taken without my knowledge. But because even though Thailand and Singapore are both acceded signatory members of the Hague Parental Child Abduction Act, once you become a member, you have to approach any country that becomes a member after and make a bilateral agreement. And so Thailand joined in 2006 or 2007, and Singapore in about 2010. It's now 2018. The prior acceding member state has to be the one who approaches the later acceding one. So it's Thailand's job to approach Singapore and say, hey, let's make a bilateral agreement. But they never have. In the how many, 10 or 12 years since they acceded, and in the 8 years since Singapore acceded. So they've wasted 8 years refusing to obey step 2 of becoming a Hague Convention member state, and as a United Nations member, they've disobeyed that. And so I couldn't use the Hague mandate to get my son returned for being abducted across international borders without my knowledge or consent. I have to add that actually, before she abducted him, I gave her a couple of $1,000 for a hotel because we had an argument and a fight. And I said we'd meet in the morning with lawyers to talk about divorce and have a custody case in Thailand. And she took that money and abducted him. I said that at the police station whilst we were making a statement about our altercation. And I told the police, the Thai Royal Police, that it is forbidden that I do not allow my son to be taken out of the country without my consent, and that in the morning I will go there and the mother should inform the police which hotel she's staying in with the money I gave her, and that we should meet up to begin divorce proceedings in Thailand. I later found out in an affidavit that the Thai police actually knew she was leaving and allowed her to leave, which means they broke an international treaty, making it not an international parental child abduction. They made it a state-assisted international kidnapping act. I've been to about 5 lawyers asking them to help, and I spoke with Judge Tirat of the Central Authority of The Hague in the Supreme Court of Thailand, who said he can't help because he's not the criminal courts, but that I should report the Thai Royal Police for assisting in a child kidnapping. But I can't find a lawyer who'll do it because they're all scared that the police will kill them, ruin their careers, or throw us all in the lake because they're corrupt in Thailand. But actually, I would like the Thai Royal Police of Nong Pru Station to be charged with assisting in an international parental child abduction and charge them with the International Child Kidnapping Act for aiding and abetting a child kidnap without consent or knowledge of the father from his habitual residence in Thailand. So that's another thing I'd just like to say. It's a long story, this first podcast. I couldn't use The Hague, so I filed a Guardianship of Infants Act case in Singapore. That would have meant Singapore would have to report the abduction in their yearly report as a member state to the United Nations on the Parental Child Abduction yearly report. And they didn't want a statistic that in 2014 a child was abducted to their country and not returned. So they hid it, and they deleted my Guardianship of Infants Act case, which I paid $8,000 Singaporean to file, and they did that without my permission, whilst I was acting in person and the case was in my possession. But they called in my sacked lawyer, who I sacked 2 months before, and forced him to access the database and delete the file, him and a judge, against my permission, with my express statements made previously that I am acting in person with that case and I wish to conduct it. But still, a Singaporean judge called in a lawyer who didn't work for me but who had access on the internet to the files and forced him to delete it so that the case would not have to be reported to the United Nations in the Singapore's annual report. 2 reports, one on the civil aspects of International Parental Child Abduction to report that there was a case in their country, so they got out of that. And the other report they would have had to make would be to the World Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Singapore is also a signatory state. Guardianship of Infants Act case would have gone onto the database and would have made their statistics of that year of Singapore would mean that there was a child abduction. And they fake their statistics. So they abused the rights of my child and hid it and deleted a case which I paid $8,000 to file. They didn't delete the mother's divorce case, which I spent the first year asking her to divorce so that we can divorce and then address the matters of custody and access to the joint custody or whatever kind of custody and access to the parent who the child doesn't live with. She refused to talk about divorce, and she didn't want to because she didn't want to address having to share the child and let him visit me. As soon as I filed the Guardianship of Infants Act case, as soon as I told her I was going to file it, stupid of me to warn her, she got there before me and filed about a week before I got that filed. She filed a divorce case. And sorry, I got this wrong. I told her I found a lawyer and that I was going to file a case. She then filed a divorce case. And then I found my lawyer and filed the Guardianship of Infants Act case. My lawyer then told me she'd already filed a divorce case and that her affidavit said that she didn't know where I was, I'd disappeared, and was asking for sole custody because she didn't have a clue where I was. When I found out about that, I told her, well, she's really in trouble because I have lots of evidence and recorded calls that actually through the whole first few months she did know where I was, and that we'd been talking on FaceTime and on telephone calls, and that she was lying in that affidavit. She pulled the affidavit back, rewrote it and refiled it. The judges accepted that and they let that case run because a domestic divorce and custody does not make Singapore have to report a child abduction in their annual report to the United Nations, and it doesn't make them have to report child abuse into the yearly report for the database on the World Convention of the Rights of the Child for its UN member states. So they deleted my Guardianship of Infants Act case to hide that from the UN, and they let the mother's divorce case run, which she'd refused to file because she didn't want to address joint custody or access, parental access, and she only filed it because she knew if she didn't, I was filing a Guardianship of Infants Act case, which is ridiculous. And so that went through as a divorce. It took 2 years. I made 5 applications for interim access so that my son could have visits with his father whilst the case was going. The judges ignored all of them completely. I spent nearly 80,000 Singaporean dollars over those 2 years. It took me well over a year to get my first visit, and the only reason I got it was because I flew to Singapore whilst my lawyers were in chambers with the judges, and told them to ask the judge if I could have a special visit because I happened to be in Singapore and sitting outside the chambers waiting for the judge's decision. Once again, being an honest person, I warned the mother in messages before that day that I'm going to go and sit in the courtroom and wait and see if the judge has the balls to send me home to Thailand without letting me visit my son. Because I warned her about it, behind the back of her own lawyer, and behind the back of my lawyer, and behind the back of the judge who was sitting in chambers on that day, she used a different lawyer to file a PPOE, which is a protection order, saying she was scared of me and that she was scared I was going to harm her. That was just a strategy, and she served it on me whilst I was sitting in the courtroom, in the court waiting room outside the chambers, as the judge was discussing with her and my lawyer the conditions of my visit. Because she asked to supervise the visit, meaning to tag along with me whilst I had my visit. I got served with a protection order whilst they were discussing that, so I had to knock on the door of the chambers and disturb the judge and her lawyer and pass the protection order to my lawyer to show them what had happened, to the disgust of the judge and the disgust of even her own lawyer, who she never told she was doing that, and she embarrassed him, trying to stop me. She thought a protection order would then make the judge have to say, no, he's not allowed to see the child. Unfortunately, the judge did a very stupid thing and allowed my visit, but because he didn't issue the protection order, he couldn't remove it. And so he allowed supervised, which meant I had a protection order against me, not allowing me to approach the mother or speak to the mother. But I had a visit with my son, and he allowed the mother to come along and walk halfway up my ass, sorry for the bad language, and she was about half a meter away from me the whole visit while I was trying to have a visit with my son. And I did talk to her, but I was actually under a protection order, not allowed to talk to her or approach her. But I had a visit with her allowed to approach me and try and provoke me so that she could then call the police, use the protection order, and take my child away from me. I videoed that, and I think maybe that's going to be the next video, part 2 of this podcast, vlog, after which I will then get on to the recorded conversations. Because I think you should see how the mother and the grandmother attempted to provoke me in front of my child on my first ever access after a year of abduction through retention, and what a ridiculous decision of the judges to allow that to happen. I'd like you to watch that. Me trying to have a visit with my son in the next shopping mall in Singapore, with the mother with a protection order on me against the mother, and the mother and her mother walking up my ass through the whole visit for 4 hours, which was absolutely cruel. Not to me. It was cruel to me, of course, but it was cruel to my son. I'm very proud of my son because he took it very well. You'll be very proud of him too when you see how well he dealt with it, the poor boy. And so the divorce went through. At the final ruling of Judge Nicole Low, who gave the final rulings, breach Article 10 of the Rights of the Child, to which Singapore is a signatory. And they say he's not allowed to leave Singapore until he's 10, and he's not allowed to overnight with me if I visit him in Singapore. I can see my son for 4 hours a day in school times, any day I'm in Singapore, which is quite nice, but I don't live in Singapore, and it costs me $5,000 every time I go. So it's limited, and he's not allowed to fly with me to Thailand until he's 10. The Article 10 of the Rights of the Child says that every child whose parents live in different countries has the right to leave and enter his own country for purposes of family visits and family reunions in the home, not a hotel, in the home. But right now my son is limited to 3 years of the first year, no visit at all. Now he's having visits from me and daily FaceTime calls. If I go to Singapore, I get him 8 hours a day in holidays or 4 hours a day on school days. I just had him from the 19th to 24th of December for 8 hours a day. Unlike the mother, I actually invited the mother on the last 2 days to come with us for dinner and let her sit in with us, even though I'd rather have my son on my own, because she's deprived him enough from me as it is. But I recognize my son's rights, and I know every child wants to see his mummy and daddy and sit together as a family. So I wanted to give him that experience and show he still does have a family. As a result, anyway, Judge Nicole Low-Verne breaches Article 10 of the Rights of the Child in her ruling, which says he is from age, 2014 when he was abducted until 2019 when he reaches age 10, not allowed to overnight with his father in Singapore, and he's not allowed to come and enjoy his right to Article 10 to leave and enter his own country to visit his father in Thailand until he's 10. After which he can for 7 days each time, which means I've got another 18 months or more to wait until I can go and pick him up. And the mother has brainwashed him now. In one of the forthcoming videos in this series, you will see my son saying, I don't ever want to see you again, I don't want you to come to Singapore to see me, and I don't want to come to Thailand, and I don't want my right to Article 10 of the Rights of the Child. I don't want my right to travel. He says that, but he said the opposite in another video I have, another recording. When I ask him alone in the hotel, when I visit, he loves Thailand and he does want to come and he does want to see me. And I have a video of him saying that. And then I have another video and sound recordings of him in FaceTime calls in the home with his mother present, where he says the opposite, where I ask him the same question, because I wanted to record for the United Nations. If not, I wouldn't confront my son with such questions, because that's also an abuse of his psychological welfare. But because the United Nations and any other child welfare organizations need proof in recordings that there's been parental alienation and brainwashing, I had to ask him the questions, which is upsetting for him. And so I asked him the questions. And the mother muted the conversation for a couple of minutes, and when he came back on, he was parroting her. He said things like, he doesn't want his right to travel, and he doesn't want to see me again ever, and so on, which is parental alienation and brainwashing. And so this is all going on YouTube, and it's going to be shared with the United Nations. And if any of you agree and want to support, you can email mikk-ve.de, who are the official mediators with Singapore and who are communicating with me and going to try and see if they can do anything to help. And you should also email jokstad@un.org, jokstad@un.org, to complain about my son, about Judge Nicole Low-Verne's ruling, which deprives my son of his right to Article 10 of the Rights of the Child, which says every child of divorced parents, or parents who aren't divorced even, who's lived in different countries, has the right to leave and re-enter his own country for purposes of family reunion. When he's 10 years old, I'll be going to pick him up and take him for his first 7-day holiday. But because of the brainwashing and him learning to say he never wants to see me again and he doesn't want his right to travel, that's his mother brainwashing him in preparation to try and file some kind of thing in the courts in Singapore before the day comes when I can take him on holiday, so she can stop it from happening. Because she's a child abductor, I'm sure the reason her behavior is this is because she thinks when I do get to take him, she thinks I won't return him. Because child abductors are scared of their children being abducted, because she knows what she did and she thinks everybody else would do what she did. I personally think a double trauma is not a solution for my son. He's already had one trauma, and a re-abduction would just be a second trauma. If my son comes to live with me, it's because he wants to, not because I abduct him. I don't think like his mother. His mother once took a bottle of bleach and poured it over herself in an attempt to kill herself with my son in his lap. And I asked her for years why she did that with him in her lap. I had to drag them both to the bathroom and pour buckets of water over them but my son's skin was pink for a week. She finally told me one day that it was because she wanted to kill herself. And I said, what, and take my son with you? She said, we belong together, which means if she's going to kill herself, she would kill her son too, because she can't bear the thought of him enjoying life with the other parent and her missing it, or her being dead and him not being dead with her. She's a very loving mother, but in that kind of sick love that where she'd actually kill her own child. In my opinion, if she was stood on the edge of a cliff about to fall over and my child was in her arms and I was within throwing distance, she wouldn't throw him to me. She'd take him with her. That's my opinion. I lived with her for 6 years and I know that's what she'd do. She has a confused attitude. And so I think that's about the end of the podcast. And if you follow the series, it's a very difficult story to understand. It's very complicated. So I'd like any of you who care to watch the series and understand it, so that if you decide you're going to support my son for his right to Article 10 of the Rights of the Child and let him travel for purposes of family reunion in the home with his father in Thailand, which is being breached by Judge Nicole Low Vern's ruling in case FC/D 1688/2015. That's what you should refer to if you email. And you can email the Family Justice Courts of Singapore to complain, and yokstad@un.org, which I'll put on this video here somewhere at the bottom when I edit it. And you can maybe just share it for transparency to mikk-ev.de, who are good people and trying to mediate with Singapore about these kind of issues. As Singapore ignores the United Nations and they ignore children's rights. If you Google human rights in Singapore and read the first 3 pages of Google results, you'll get a shock about what kind of country that is. Silences its own people, self-censorship of the press, self-censorship of lawyers so they can't even represent you properly, and all sorts of stuff like judicial canings on 14-year-old children that leaves scarring, bleeding, and you can't sit down for a month and often needs an actual operation to fix it. It's a brutal country, and my son's trapped there, kidnapped and being brainwashed. So please follow this podcast. And please learn to understand the subject which only left behind parents of international parental abducted children and parentally alienated and brainwashed children. Parents of those children know about it, but the rest of the world doesn't. We all know about ISIS. We all know about, there's millions of problems you have to solve. It's just one of many. I'm not asking you to interest yourself just with this. Human rights are important. And you can search in Facebook for Human Rights Singapore, which is my group. And if you're Singaporean or not Singaporean, you want to share any abuse or any wrong things or your opinions on there, please join the group. And you can go to Human Right Singapore, not rights with an S, humanrightsingapore.com, which is a website about human rights and the lack of them in Singapore, to read about other issues too. So please help and email Miss Jennifer Yokstad at the United Nations in Thailand or the Human Rights section, and to mikk-ev.de to support the freeing of my son Angelo Chi-Littlewood, who is a parentally abducted, retained and alienated and brainwashed child. In the next series, you'll be hearing some recordings which lead up to my son saying he never wants to see me again. But because he has to FaceTime me by court order, he called me today, the day after he just said he never wants to talk to me again, and I videoed it. So you'll watch that one too, and you'll see, does that look like a child who never wants to see his dad again? Because actually we were having a good time. He just hates having to have this forced 7 o'clock in the evening call. You know, it's forced, so it makes him not want to do it. And he's been taught to not communicate with me. The other recordings which will follow this video are recordings of a telephone conversation between me and the mother where I'm telling her off, because I always teach my son to keep in touch with his mum when he's with me. but she has not taught him to message me back. And he hasn't answered any of my thousands of messages and photos and videos that I send him in iMessage for months. And I think she's a bad mother, because if he lived with me and his mum was in Singapore and he lived in Thailand with me and she was sending him messages, I'd be saying, answer the messages, son, that's bad manners, your mummy loves you. And I always tell him, your mummy loves you and daddy loves you. But she doesn't tell him daddy loves you. She just tells him mummy loves you. And she tells him daddy's very bad. And so I'm going to continue recording every FaceTime call he makes so that you can decide for yourselves. And so you, Jennifer, and you, Miss Ishtar, who I respect very much, and I apologize to because I got a bit not very polite in some emails because I thought that everybody was ignoring me, because most authorities have ignored me over the last 3 years. But it turns out that actually you're the first people who are prepared to try and help me if you can. I don't think you can, but maybe mediate with Singapore about my son. You might not end up helping my son, but at least in the long run we can help children around the world in the future. Most victims of parental child abduction are so consumed in their own issue that they don't join groups and share other people's child abductions. And it's much important. I noticed that on Facebook, that on my page I was sharing the plight of other children and parents on my page and my groups, and I was connecting with those people and messaging them saying, would you also help and share, let's join together, because it's only when we join together as a community that we can fight the scourge that is international parental child abduction and the powerlessness of The Hague, which is a joke, it's a farce, that billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions are given to The Hague Child Abduction Department of the United Nations, and they do nothing. They just find ways out of not having to do anything because of the trade deals they're making with the child abuse countries. They're not going to risk the billions. Half of the rulers in the United Nations are actually businessmen. Half of the prime ministers are property owners and corporate businessmen. That's why they get into politics, so that they can do these trade deals with each other. And so they're not going to ruin their trade deals for the sake of Angelo Chi Littlewood, who is abducted and being parentally brainwashed, or because the Singapore government unlawfully deleted a Guardianship of Infants Act case I filed, just so that they can keep the matter out of the eyes of the United Nations annual report on child abductions and the rights of the child, hiding statistics. You know, I've informed the UN, Irene Hennigan, who is the new official mediator of European Parliament for International Parental Child Abduction section of the UN, and also Miss McGuinness, who was the previous head mediator. And they referred me to mikk-ev.de, who are being very nice to me. And I don't believe they're going to help me, because every agency I have spoken to has responded, starting saying, yes, we'll try to help, send us your info. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, sorry, because of Rule 34B 7.721, special excuse we invented when we wrote these rules, we can't help you. And I think it's because they don't want to spend the funds the European Parliament and the UN gives to each department for their own existence on helping children. They want to spend it on coffee machines and a nice BMW and a nice company car for themselves. That's what they want to do. And brag about what they're doing in dialogue on their Facebook pages, but never actually do something. It's all dialogue. And so it seems like to me, mikk-ev.de in Germany seem to be the only real organization who are actually trying to do something. They haven't done anything for me yet, but I've spoken with them and they really do seem dedicated. I've spoken on the phone and I could feel the heart of the person talking to me, that they really are concerned about children. I lived in Germany for 10 years and children's rights are very, very important, and they have their rights in Germany, much better than in many other countries. It's not perfect, but anyway. End of podcast. I hope you've understood a few of these very complex matters, and that this ends, the whole series will end with, what I want is public support for my son, and that for you all to email jokstad@un.org, and I'll give you in the comments, in the description of these videos, the email addresses of the family courts, I don't know what the judge, how to contact Judge Nicole Lovern. And I know what I'm saying here by mentioning her name, that when I fly to Singapore to see my son, if they see this video, they will arrest me for defamation. They just brought a new law in that judges are impunable. You can't sue a judge, or a judge can't get in trouble. Doesn't matter what they do. They can't get in trouble. It's a new law, which the UN aren't happy about, and they're going to hear about that. But that's nothing to do with me. Yeah, beware, Singapore, because you're breaking a lot of human rights rules. You're not just making enemies with me, you're making enemies with the United Nations. They know, and they're not pleased about it, I can tell you that. Maybe they haven't yet, but you'll be hearing from them, I promise. And so anyway, if you charge me for defamation, Judge Nicole Lovern, I'll be able to pull out the proof that an unlawful deletion of a Guardianship of Infants Act case by a corrupt judge and a perjury of a judge who said it was deleted 2 months before he actually deleted it, and that when I took over the case and refused to allow it to be deleted, he called in my ex-lawyer and under duress forced him to delete it to save his face and stop the statistic entering the United Nations. You charge me for defamation, because then I'll pull out that evidence I have that proves that one of your judges committed a perjury and a deliberate manipulation of cause of justice by deleting a case he wasn't authorized to delete because he hadn't received the official order or permission to delete it. So, same thing they did with Alan Shadrake, the poor fellow, of the Guardian newspaper. He wrote about the death sentence and some of the judicial methods in Singapore. And when he went to Singapore for a book signing session, they let him in and let him go to his book signing to sign his books, and then a horde of police pounced on him and arrested him, imprisoned him for 2 or 3 months, fined him £20,000, made him make a public apology. But all they did was make an enemy, the poor fellow. He lives in Malaysia now, and he dedicates his life to exposing the injustices and these terrible things that the Singaporean government do. Singaporean people are fantastic people. I love Singaporeans, and that's why I campaign for them. My son is Singaporean. I'm very concerned. In a country with judicial canings, you're not allowed to demonstrate. You're not even allowed to blow soap bubbles, you know, like baby, blow bubbles like a baby. You search on YouTube, there's a guy blowing bubbles. He's a clown, he's a children's entertainer, and he's blowing bubbles for people who are grumpily on their way home from work in the MRT tube station to try and cheer them up. And he ends up with 12 policemen around him trying to arrest him for blowing soap bubbles, children's soap bubbles. And the guy saying, it's chemicals, it's dangerous. It's fucking children's soap bubbles. You're not even allowed to blow bubbles in Singapore. You don't talk about serious human rights, you can't even blow bubbles, man. Okay, so Jan Spencer, hoping that this series will help to expose the injustices of the Singapore government, and I don't think I'll be able to help my son, because by the time any action can be taken, it'll be time for me to go and take him on holiday after he reaches 10 years old. The judge doesn't allow an overnight, which means my son will have spent from 2014 to 2019, he's not allowed to spend a night with me. But then when he's 10, he's allowed to go for 7 days at a time and 7 nights with me alone. So how does Judge Nicole Lovern, I want to ask you personally, not allowing my son to overnight in Singapore after 3 years of retention and another 2 years before he's allowed to travel, allowing him not a single overnight as a warm-up to get ready for 7 nights alone with me in Thailand, how is that going to prepare him for his first 7 nights in Thailand? How is 5 years of depriving him of a single overnight with his dad in a hotel in Singapore to begin with before he's allowed to travel to Thailand, how does that forbidding him to overnight for 5 years prepare him for 7 nights alone with his dad in a country he's been forbidden to travel to for 5 years? Your stupid ruling, Judge Nicole Lovern. You've just sentenced my son to daily forced FaceTime calls so that he hates having to call his dad, and deprive him of 5 years of overnights as a preparation of 7 overnights together. That's going to be a shock for him, because you've given him no warm-up or preparation. You've actually forbidden me to let my son overnight with me in Singapore. Are you stupid? You understand nothing about children's psychology or welfare. You're damaging my son. I accuse you of child abuse. Nicole Low Verne, one of the worst child abuse judges in Singapore. I'm angry with you. So you take me for defamation, and I'll make sure that that becomes international news. Okay? I invite you. Come on, I'm defaming you. You're a child abuser. Judge Nicole Low Verne, you deprived my son of his right to Article 10 of the rights of the child in your ruling. It's an unlawful ruling, and you'll be hearing more about this. You won't stop hearing about it until you free my son. Free Angelo Chi Littlewood and give him his right to Article 10 of the rights of the child. Please write to the UN, write to the Singaporean government and the family justice, and blame Nicole Low Verne. Judge Nicole Low. You call her Judge Nicole Low. She's the person who did this to my son and to me. Sorry for getting angry, people. I love my son. I think this is maybe a very long and boring video cast, but I need to get this out. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in 2018 to you. And may my son be freed this year instead of in 2 years' time when he's 10. Please help Angelo Chi Littlewood to get his rights back so I can de-brainwash him and so I can show him that he has 2 homes and 2 loving parents, and that this house with its own swimming pool and a really nice garden to play in and loads of nice kids, neighbours, it's a great place for him to come on holiday and stay with his dad, who loves him very much because I love him so much. And I know he loves me, as you will see in the following video casts. Ajahn Spencer, signing off with no teeth. They fell out with stress because of this. I look like a vampire or a hippo, don't I? Bye-bye. Happy New Year, everyone.